Peru, Philippines, Saudi Arabia, Singapore, and Turkey, and also Ukraine. Thank you all for taking time to be here. Your overwhelming and enthusiastic response has been very motivating, and I can just promise you some great takeaways at the end of the session. The last few months in the pandemic have brought in an epidemic of webinars, FDPs, and educators and learners have taken it up passionately and willingly, as the number of participants show today. When the chapter started planning the session, no one expected that we would be generating this kind of reaction. 822 registrations and would you believe it, 39 countries? We are overwhelmed. The organizers too have showed the resourcefulness by stepping up their efforts at every step. It is said that the future belongs to those who step up to face the challenges given by life. And the journey of the Mumbai chapter seems to be an apt testimony of this. Inaugurated on April 15, 2016, today it has rapidly grown and diversified extensively under the able guidance of its very hardworking core committee members and also the other supportive members. A quick overview of the activities. Focusing on the professional advancement of the English teaching fraternity, the chapter has organized several national and international workshops with eminent speakers. It has attempted to upskill and upgrade the teaching fraternity with a webinar series even before the pandemic by introducing contemporary and need-based topics like rubrics, post-colonial theory, Bollywood and its biopics, and objective-based education, to name a few. Interesting projects in the pipeline, which also aim to collaborate and connect on a larger scale, are a year-long action research program on teaching learning processes, a 6-day international FDP on approaches and trends in English language and literature, which is coming up very soon. So let us get started on today's webinar entitled Empirical Research, the Fun Way, which happens to be the 6th session in the series and promises to be an enriching and exciting and enlivening learning session. We have with us today the electrifying and enigmatic Dr. Chumki Biswas. Before we begin, keep a watch for the attendance and feedback links in the chat box. We will be running a live Q&A at the end, so do use the chat box. Since we have participants from different countries, we would request you to key in your doubts, suggestions, and queries so that greater awareness is created on a global level about the research taking place in this area. I now invite Mrs. Anupama Shenoy to introduce Dr. Chumki Biswas. Over to you, Anupama.
Thank you, Tamasha ma'am, for that scintillating start to our webinar. And now we will talk about the star of our webinar. And first of all, let me thank ELTAI Mumbai chapter for giving me an opportunity to introduce a world-class resource person for their session today. So right away, it's my proud privilege to introduce the participants to the speaker for the evening, Dr. Chumki Biswas. She's an assistant professor in Thadomal Shani Engineering College, University of Mumbai, and she holds a doctorate in the field of English language teaching from the University of Mumbai and is actively involved in extensive research in task-based teaching for listening and speaking skills. She has 18 years of teaching experience and is often invited as an area expert in well-acclaimed institutes like the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Department of English, and the Department of Distance Education of the Mumbai University. Moreover, she's been associated with Oxford University Press for the past 13 years as a subject matter expert and has conducted over 400 workshops, and I'll repeat that, over 400 workshops and seminars in English language teaching and soft skills, business communication, and organizational behavior, and many more such important and trending topics and subjects. She is a key member of the Board of Studies. So it's not just as a trainer, but as an academician, Dr. Chumki Biswas is the chosen one to be part of the Board of Studies in the University of Mumbai for the subject of professional communication and ethics for engineering students, wherein she helped in redesigning the course in 2 subjects for 2 consecutive semesters for the engineering students. So we are fortunate to have her with us today. And I'll add a bit more here so that you know that we are very fortunate. She's associated with international organizations like Prometric, the USA, and Sprott School of Business in Canada, and the Oxford University Press, UK, in the capacity of an expert. So I welcome Dr. Chumki Biswas and request her to deliver her talk on empirical research, the fun way, part of the 6th webinar series organized by ELTAI Mumbai chapter, the ELTAI Mumbai chapter. So I hand over to Dr. Chumki Biswas with pleasure, and I look forward to being part of the proceedings. Thank you, and welcome, Chumki Biswas, madam, to the webinar, and I invite you to begin your talk.
Good evening to all my viewers. Thank you, Mrs. Chinoy, for that lovely introduction. I was just worried that it's getting too long and you've made such tall claims. I hope I'm able to live up to the expectation of the audience. Because time is of the essence, I will not go into long introduction, but before I share my slides today, I would like to share a little bit of my personal experience. Now, when I was a college student, I used to look at research scholars with so much awe. And to me, they used to appear like superhuman beings with super intelligence and skill sets that are far beyond the level of an average student like me. So as Providence would have it, I joined the teaching community. And when I came into this academic world in a professional capacity, I realized that it's quite pretentious. And I'll tell you why I'm saying that. It's because I sense there is this unspoken divide between the us and the them, the people who have a doctorate degree and the people who do not have. The reason I shared this is to express upon the fact that research is not the domain of a selected few or a privileged few. Anybody, absolutely anybody, can do research. But in order to do research, you need to have 3 things. The first thing is that you should have the spirit of inquiry in you. It's that undying thirst where you want to know something. The second thing is the reason behind your research. If you are looking to publish a paper, or if you're looking to get that degree, then maybe that's not the right reason why you should embark upon research. Research is because you really want to find the answer to a question which keeps burning in your head. The third thing is that once you have found the answer, you should be willing to share it with people, with the world at large, so that they can benefit from your knowledge. So if you have these 3 things, the thirst for inquiry, the desire to find something useful, and the third thing, the desire to share it with the world, I think you're all set to do good research. So now I will share my screen. That might take a few seconds. Now, when I started my own journey of research, I was pretty much like a headless chicken running around because I really did not have any idea how to go about it systematically. And I realized that, research had become traumatic for me in some ways, and it was like an albatross hanging around my head. So I had lost the fun of doing good research. The reason I desperately wanted to hold this webinar today is because I wanted to share my experience with people and tell them how research need not be a burden, how research need not be a cross to bear. Good research is actually fun, and my endeavor today would be to show you how to do empirical research the fun way. Now, I would like to draw your attention to that little bouncing apple, because this apple is going to bounce in and out of my screen every now and then, and I'm going to use it to explain the entire concept of empirical research. Now, my promise to my audience today is that by the end of this session, you will be able to, first of all, understand what is empirical research, what are the principles that underlie empirical research. You would understand how to go about it systematically, unlike me. And also, the most important thing is that you will gain the confidence and also the desire to embark upon empirical research. Now, today's webinar, I have divided into 5 sections. The first section, I'm going to talk about understanding empirical research. The second part of it, I'll be talking about how to frame hypothesis. A third and very important part is to explain the distinction between a quantitative and qualitative data. Fourth part will deal with some of the tools that we would require to collect the data. Now, this part is going to be very important because due to this COVID problem, we are all caged inside a house. So it's difficult for you to actually go out and do field work and collect data. So I'm going to show you a few ways in which you can sit in the safety of your house and you can still get your data. The last part would be the blueprint of an empirical paper. If time permits, I would get into it, but if we are running short of time, then I might just have to, rush through the last part of this presentation. Now, the first part, I'm going to talk about empirical research, demystified. And, I think you must be wondering if investing 2 hours will be justified on a Sunday evening. Well, it will be my effort to change the skepticism that you have in your head right now and move towards the confidence which you should be feeling by the time I reach part 5 of the presentation. Now, when we are talking about empirical research, I thought a good place to start would be by explaining what the word empirical means, because all of us have an idea about what it means, but mostly it's pretty vague. So I decided to hit the dictionaries. And what I read, the different definitions, the formal definitions, left me even more confused than I was before. So I decided to chuck it all. And I decided that I'll frame my own definition in a simpler way. So to me, empirical means to observe, to measure, and to verify. Now, your next question will be, what do we observe, measure, and verify? And to answer you, here is it. We are going to observe data, we're going to measure data, and we are going to verify data. Now, the word empirical is an adjective, which means that most of the time it is placed before the noun, and that is exactly what I'm going to do right now. So if you add empirical to data, what you get is empirical data. Empirical data, again, to reiterate what I already said, is data that is observable, it is measurable, and it is verifiable. Now, I'm going to take you to the classification of empirical data. Empirical data is basically of 2 kinds, primary data and secondary data. Now, when I'm talking about primary data, it simply means data which you go and collect. You are the one who will do the field work. You're the one who will go and meet your sample group and collect data. On the other hand, secondary data is data which is collected by somebody else. Somebody else collected the data, and this data is already available in some kind of repository. So you doing research on somebody else's data really does not make sense, because that person must have already done his or her research on that data. So I don't think you are really going to find anything useful in that data, except for in certain cases. So good empirical research only focuses on primary data. Primary data means first-hand data. It's your data you collect, it's your baby. And when you apply the research angle to it, what you get is empirical research. So I think we've pretty much understood the term empirical research, starting with the word empirical and then how it leads on to empirical research. Now, the next slide, I'm going to explain the difference between empirical. If there is something called empirical, then there also it means that there is something called non-empirical. So on the left-hand side of this continuum, you see I have put in red the word purely empirical, and on the right-hand side in white, I have labeled as purely non-empirical. Now, purely, you can also think of it as absolute empirical, or purely non-empirical as absolute non-empirical. Okay, now when I'm trying to explain the difference between empirical and non-empirical, I think I can give the example of college students. When they are in college, what they get to learn is mostly theory. So theory, when we're talking and dealing with theory, it's non-empirical. But when the same students, they go out into the job market, what they gain is real experience. So purely empirical research is experience. Purely non-empirical research has everything to do with theory. Now, when you're talking about empirical, it deals with facts, experiences, observations. And on the other hand, if you're talking about purely non-empirical, it relies on theories, it relies on models, and it relies on conjectures. Now, I'm going to tell you something very interesting. Purely non-empirical research is not very meaningful. And you would be asking, if it is not meaningful, then why are we having this session? So I'll just explain to you why it is not meaningful until and unless you put it in some kind of a context. So to take this example, let me just put it this way, that the human body needs micronutrients and macronutrients. When you're talking about micronutrients, we have vitamins and we have minerals that our body needs. And in macronutrients, we have like carbs, proteins, fats, things that we need. Now, just because somebody told you that we need minerals, you cannot pick up an iron bar and put it in your mouth and chew it and expect that your body will absorb the iron. Now, the iron is in the pure form, just like your empirical pure fats. But even though if it is very pure, our body is not geared to absorb it. Our body cannot absorb it until and unless you put it in the form of a compound in some kind of food. For example, it can be a vegetable, it can be a fruit, or it can be some pulses. So what I'm going to tell you in terms of non-empirical is akin to a fruit or a food which is edible, but it does not have micronutrients nor macronutrients. So it is no good to your body. So on one hand, you have pure minerals, which you cannot chew and absorb, so it's useless to our body. And on the other hand, you have food which you can eat, it is not giving you any kind of nutrition. So this is exactly what it means, that if you're looking at absolutely empirical research, it really does not make any sense, because it's not going to help us until you put it in a context. So what we have to do is we have to find a point of balance between purely empirical and purely non-empirical. And I have put this little rhombus as a marker. You will notice that the marker is dark pink in shade, which means that it has some aspects of empirical and it has some aspects of non-empirical. But you'll also notice that it is more towards the purely empirical side. And that is because good empirical research deals with 90% facts, and it is grounded on 10% theory. The 10% theory is going to give it the context that it requires to make it applicable to people. Now, on the other hand, you see a slightly lighter in pink shade, this rhombus, which is more towards the non-empirical side. And this is the kind of research which deals with theories, models. And most of the time, you will notice that people who come from the humanities background, arts background, they are a little scared of numbers. They're a little scared of mathematical calculations. So they're more comfortable doing research, which is non-empirical in nature. But when you're talking about non-empirical nature, what happens is that you are spouting out 90% theory, but you're giving only 10% of fact. So it is difficult to prove what you're claiming. The reason why I'm here today is to convince people that now is the time to make a move from purely non-empirical research or literature review kind of research and move towards a good empirical research, because today we need applied sciences. Today we need applied linguistics. So everything that you do has to go out of the theory stage and it has to be made into a form which is actually applicable. So this is the difference between empirical and non-empirical research. Next, I'm going to show you how to identify that if you come across papers, you will see there are papers which are empirical and which are non-empirical, but how do you identify what you have in your hand as an empirical paper? So when I enter my house, my nose pretty much is able to identify what is cooking today for lunch because I'm able to identify the smell of the different ingredients that has gone into my lunch. So here is my cooking pot. Here is the fire. Now, if you throw in the ingredients of research question, if you see primary data, if you come across words like methodology, if you come across words like results and conclusion, then you can rest assured, you can close your eyes and you can say that what you have in your hands right now is an empirical research paper and not a non-empirical one. So now that I've explained the difference between empirical and non-empirical, I'm moving on to part 2, where I'm going to talk about how to frame hypotheses. Now, I've spelled the word hypotheses with an SES, which means that it's in the plural form. But if I'm going to talk about a single hypothesis, then it is spelled with a SIS. Now, before I show you on how to frame a good hypothesis, I'm going to show you a picture. And there are no points for guessing who this is, because the moment you see the apple, it's a dead giveaway to the fact that we are looking at Newton here. Now, when apple fell on Newton's head, something magical happened. He asked himself a question, that why did the apple fall down instead of going up? And that is the starting point of a research that he tried to find an answer. And today we have gravity because of him. So what I'm trying to point out is that the starting point of every research is always a question, and the heart of every research is a question. Now, here I want to make a point that when you ask a question, do not be worried whether it is a silly question, whether it's a stupid question, because I don't think there can be anything sillier than somebody thinking, why did the apple fall down? But imagine, had he not asked that silly question, today we wouldn't know about gravity, today we wouldn't be having maglev trains, today we wouldn't be having space travel. So no question is silly. You ask it, and if it really has worth in it, then you will be able to do research on it. Now, the next part is, I told you that I'll be using the example of an apple throughout my presentation. So here is a very old proverb which says, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. Now, have you ever wondered if this proverb is true? Now, in order to find out if this proverb has real worth in it, if it is true, what we need to do is we need to test this. And in order to test this, what we need to do is we need to first frame a hypothesis. We need to first formulate a hypothesis. Now, I'm going to tell you what hypothesis is in very simple terms. Hypothesis is nothing but a prediction. So I look out of the window and I see gray clouds, and I predict that it is going to rain in the next 1 hour. So a hypothesis is a statement which means that it ends with a full stop, unlike a question which ends with a question mark. So the question can be, will it rain in the next 1 hour? But if I convert it into a hypothesis, it will sound like it will rain in the next 1 hour. So it's certainty, and it ends with a full stop. Now, a statement, a hypothesis, is basically a statement of what you want to find in your research, what you predict you will find in your research. Now, it is not a random guess, because from childhood, I know the difference between a sunny sky and an overcast sky. So if I see an overcast sky, I have prior knowledge, I have existing knowledge to make a prediction that it is going to rain. So now that we have understood what a hypothesis is, I'm going to take you to the 6 steps that you need to follow to frame a strong hypothesis. Now, it's basically a very formulaic affair, and I want to draw attention to the word strong, because sometimes we frame a hypothesis, but if it's not strong, if it's a weak one, people can easily overturn it. People can easily mow you down, and then you will feel rather stupid. So what we want to do is that we want to frame a hypothesis which is so strong that you can attack it from every side and it will still, hold its ground. So what is the first step? The first step, as I told about Newton, he asked a question and therefore stopped his journey. Now, you ask a question, this question should be specific, it should be focused, and it should be researchable. Now, these 3 words in isolation wouldn't mean anything much until and unless I put it in the context of an example. So let us take the proverb and let us frame a question on it. Will eating an apple every day reduce doctor's visits? And then after we have framed the basic question, step 2 is you need to do some background study. Now, why do I say you need to do some background study is that if you go online and if you find that there's already a lot of existing study, a lot of existing data on the topic, the question that you're asking, then the possibility of you finding anything new and throwing light on it is very, very rare. So once you do background research on the apple, to continue with the example of the apple, you find that, it's got a lot of vitamin C. It's full of nutrients, and it also has immune booster capabilities. So now this gives you the confidence to think that maybe if you eat apples, it might just contribute to fewer doctor's visits. Apples are really good. So maybe this question is worthwhile. And now I've got the confidence from background research, from background reading, to go ahead and go to step 3. What is step 3? Step 3 is you write the answer to the question in step 1. Now, in step 1, just to remind you, what question did we frame? Will eating an apple every day reduce doctor's visits? And here is your hypothesis. This is your first effort towards your hypothesis. And you say daily apple consumption will lead to fewer doctor's visits. Okay, now this is the first thing that you have framed. Now, it is still rough, it is still raw and rough around the edges. So we need to polish it up, we need to refine it. So step 3, after that, step 4, is to refine your hypothesis. Now, how do you refine it? You refine it by adding more specific details. Now, once you make it more specific and you see that the details should be testable, what you get is a better hypothesis. Now, I would like to draw your attention to the circle here, daily apple consumption. Now, this is known as the independent variable, and fewer doctor's visits is known as the dependent variable. Now, things might start sounding a little confusing because people from the arts background, we don't like words like variables and all. But what I'll do is I'll try and make this simpler for us to understand. So what are variables? Variables are nothing but characteristics or factors. Now, there are three types of variables. The first one is known as the independent variable, which means its characteristics that can be manipulated by the researcher. For example, I can tell you that you need to have 2 apples in the morning and 2 apples in the evening to make sure that you visit the doctor less. Or I can tell you that you have to eat a kg of apple every alternate day to reduce the number of visits to the doctor. So how many apples to eat and how often to eat is decided by me, the researcher. So the eating of apple is known as the independent variable. The second one is known as the dependent variable. Now, dependent variable is nothing but the characteristics which is affected by the manipulation of the independent variable. That means if I increase the consumption of apple, the number of visits to the doctor might increase or decrease depending on what I'm trying to prove. So anything that is affected by the independent variable is known as the dependent variable. The last type of variable, the third one, is the extraneous variable. Now, extraneous variable deals with maybe the age of your sample group, the sex, the race they come from. And most of the time, extraneous variables have to do with demographic factors. Now, I'm going to show you the same hypothesis that we had framed earlier, but this time I have refined it a little more because I've added in a little more specific details. So let me first point out the independent variable, that is your daily apple consumption. Then we go to the dependent variable, that is the pure number. I predict that there will be fewer number of visits. So dependable variable is basically your prediction. And this is the okay. And what I added right now is children below 12. So this is your extraneous variable. It shows that I'm not going to research people across all age groups. I'm only going to focus on children below 12 years of age. Now, sometimes it's difficult to, remember variables, independent, dependent. So just to make it even more simpler, you can think of the independent variable as the cause, and you can think of the dependent variable as the effect. So a basic hypothesis should have 2 things in it. It should have a cause and it should have an effect. And the entire hypothesis should be about establishing a relationship between the cause and the effect. If something happens, you're predicting that something else will happen. What will happen is known as the effect. Now, I'm going to give you a second example to make it even clearer. Now, with the background of COVID pandemic, we know that, it has affected everybody and mostly children because they are young, they are careless. So the possibility of them not washing their hands often, if not reminded constantly, and touching their nose, mouth is very high. So the possibility of children falling sick because their immune levels are also low is very, very high. Now, as a researcher, I think to myself that what can I possibly do to make sure that children in school fall sick less? So towards this, I want to do a test. I want to test a hypothesis, an idea that I have. So what I do is I decide that, okay, maybe if I, paste posters in schools, the children will look at it and they'll be constantly reminded about the fact that they need to wash their hands. And this might lead to the possibility that they'll fall sick less. So the poster is my independent factor. This is the cause, and the effect that I'm predicting will happen is that they'll fall sick less. Now, I am the one who's the researcher, so I get to decide whether I want to put one poster at the entrance gate or I want to put multiple posters everywhere I want to put static paper posters or I want to put LCD display screen. So how many posters, where I want to put it, what kind of posters I want to put is my decision. So this is known as the test group because in this test school, I'm going to use the poster. Now, if you have a test group, then you also necessarily need to have a control group because the control group is where you will see what happens if you don't put a poster. So a control group is where you remove the cause, you remove your experiment cause, and you see if it is removed, what happens. And we know maybe if it is removed, children will not be reminded so often, so they will fall sick. So now you can try and prove that maybe putting posters in schools are likely to make sure that the children will fall sick less. So I'll move on to the next slide and see I have framed the hypothesis for you from the same background. School children exposed to a poster are less likely to fall sick. Now, the poster here is your independent factor because I'm going to manipulate the poster. How many, where, okay, what kind of poster. Likely to fall sick is my prediction. So this is your dependent variable. And school children, see, I'm not going to look at college-going students. I'm not going to look at working men and women. I'm only going to focus my attention on school children. So school children here are your extraneous variable. And to put it simply, the poster is your cause, and the effect is that children are less likely to fall sick. So this, I hope, is good enough for you to understand that a hypothesis, if it is to be strong, at the least needs to have two things. It needs to have the cause and it needs to have an effect. And you should be able to establish a relationship between the cause and the effect. Okay, we are moving to step 5. Now that you have a nice refined hypothesis, what we need to do is try and frame it in 2 or 3 different alternative ways. So this reminds me of school days when, our teachers used to insist we do some sentence transformation. So what I'm basically going to show you is nothing other than sentence transformation. It is the same hypothesis I'm going to use, but I'm going to frame it in 3 different ways. The first construction way is if and then format. So here is the hypothesis in the if and then format. If children below 12 consume an apple daily, then they will visit the doctor less. I have highlighted the words if and then in red for you. The second type of framing a hypothesis, the second format you can say, is the correlation or effect. So here, my focus, I'm going to foreground the result part more. So look at how this looks. Daily apple consumption by children below 12 will result in a decreased frequency of doctor's visits. So my focus more is on the result. See, the words here I used is will result in, I could very well say will lead to. So what word you use is not as important as the purpose. The purpose is to focus on the effect part of it. Okay, now the third one is the comparison way. The comparison construction looks like this. Children below 12 who consume an apple daily visit the doctor less frequently than those who don't. Now, this is fashioned exactly in the way I gave the previous example about the poster. So children who were from schools where the posters were displayed are less likely to fall sick than children who belong to schools which did not display any posters. So you're doing a comparison. Now I will move on to the last step. The last step is known as framing the null hypothesis. Now, you really do not need to understand a lot about the null hypothesis, but I feel it is important that you know this term. This term is used when you are going to do a statistical hypothesis testing. Now, to put it simply, a null hypothesis assumes that there is no correlation between the variables. That means there's no relation between the cause and the effect. Here is the same example for you, framed in the null hypothesis format. So daily apple consumption by children below 12 will have no effect on the frequency of doctor's visits. So see, the no effect is denying any relation between the cause and the effect. They're just saying these are random. The cause is random and the effect is random. There is no correlation. So this is a null hypothesis. You should be able to frame one, even though you don't really have to use it. Your statistician will be using this for the calculation. Okay. Now I have given a few questions on the screen. I will be putting up the question and the corresponding hypothesis that I framed. Now, because there are 3 of them and we really do not have a lot of time, I'm not going to take you through all of them. You can read it later. But I will look at the second one. The second one says, will the use of online quizzes during a grammar session help retain the flagging interest of students? Now, this is a problem we're all facing in regular face-to-face teaching. It's anyway so difficult to hold the attention of these students. So if you are remote, if you're online, then it's even more difficult. So you keep wondering, how can I make the students interested? How can I keep their interests alive? So I asked myself a question: will, applying quizzes on my students, giving them online quizzes, help them to retain the interest? Then I get an answer. I frame a hypothesis saying using interim quizzes during online grammar sessions will increase the involvement rate of students. So here, introducing quizzes is your independent factor, and increasing the involvement rate of student is your dependent factor. So the quiz is your cause and the involvement factor is your effect. Now that I have taken you through the first two aspects, what is empirical research and how do you frame a hypothesis, I'm going to use a quiz for you because I already know that a quiz is pretty useful. I've got this feedback from my students, so you can consider it as a small research that I've done with my own student, and it worked. So I know that I can apply the same thing to my audience. So Abhijit sir, I would request you to post link number 1 on the chat box in the YouTube channel. It's in the form of, it's a quiz in the Google form. I request my audience to quickly run through the 4 questions. These are 4 multiple choice questions, and I will be timing myself exactly for 2 minutes. And after 2 minutes, I will go to part 3. Abhijit sir, once you paste the link, please give me a verbal confirmation.
Ma'am, link has been pasted.
Thank you. So I'm starting my stopwatch now. Exactly after 2 minutes, I'll move on to section 3.
अभिषेक सर लिंक पोस्ट करे किया ना?
Yes, sir.
Link open up नहीं
Link is not opening. तुम्ही
50 is my score.
opening. Sorry.
Okay, so I have waited for exactly 2 minutes. Any which ways, it's not a timed quiz, so you can take your time to finish it while I start preparing for the next section. The next section that we're going to look at is qualitative versus quantitative data. Now, when I started my research, I had absolutely no idea about the distinction between qualitative and quantitative, and it was such a mouthful, and both these words started with the letter Q, so I found it very confusing. So I want to take my audience through the difference between qualitative data and quantitative data. Now, I'm going to use that apple from Newton again, and here it's bouncing onto my screen. So when I talk about this apple, if I have to describe it, I might just call it that it's big, okay? Or I might just say that it is very sweet. Now, when I'm talking about big and sweet, you will realize that I'm using words to describe the qualities of the apple. Now, when I'm describing in words, what I'm doing is giving a subjective opinion. Now, what is subjective? Now, somebody who is used to eating hybrid apples, they have seen really big size apples. For them, big might be really big, but somebody who's used to eating small Kashmiri apples, to them, the concept of big might be the Kashmiri apple. So how big is big for people is different from different people. Similarly, it depends on your palate how sweet you find an apple. If you're used to very sweet apples, then an apple which is not so sweet might not be very appealing to you. So subjective means that the opinion changes from person to person to person. So if you have 20 subjects, you will have 20 different kinds of opinions. Now, qualitative data necessarily deals with feelings, attitudes, and opinions. And the only thing is that it is difficult to measure people's attitudes and opinions because there is no point of commonness where you can find and categorize the data. Since you cannot categorize, you find it difficult to measure, and it cannot be measured in a way, and that's why comparison is also difficult. But on the other hand, if I say, instead of that the apple is big, if I say that it weighs 100 grams, what I'm doing is I'm being more specific. And instead of saying it's very sweet, I can say that it has 19 grams of sugar. Now look at the difference. On the right-hand side, I'm giving out the properties of the apple, not in words, but I'm giving it out in terms of numbers. Now, the moment I use numbers, my description of the apple becomes objective in the sense that if you weigh it, it's 100 grams. If somebody else weighs it, it's still 100 grams. If you taste it in the laboratory and find 19 grams of sugar, somebody else testing the same apple will find 19 grams. So the data does not change from different subject to subject. So it is objective. And the next one is it deals with facts. I will go back to your first few slides where I talked about data, which is observable, which is measurable, and which is verifiable. So this is exactly what quantitative means, that the data that you have should be measurable. Okay, so it is easy to measure, and because you can measure, it's easy to categorize and it is easy to compare. So if I put it simply, the one big difference that easily marks out a qualitative data from quantitative data is that qualitative data is not measurable, but quantitative data is definitely measurable. Now, I'm going to take you to the next slide, and I'm going to talk about the differences between qualitative and quantitative data. I've already spoken about some of them in the previous slide, but I'll just repeat them once again. See, qualitative data deals with people's feelings, attitudes, and opinions, whereas quantitative data would restrict itself only to facts which are verifiable. Now, the approach of a qualitative data is subjective. That means it differs from person to person to person. Whereas quantitative data, no matter how many subjects you use, the data is pretty much going to be the same because it's objective in nature. Now, data type. In terms of qualitative data, when you go out and collect data, you will see that all the data that you collect is in the form of words or narratives and mostly in the form of adjectives. Whereas when you go and collect quantitative data, you will see that your data is in the form of numbers. It's numerical. Now, reasoning. Qualitative data uses inductive reasoning and quantitative uses deductive reasoning. Now, this is a little difficult concept to explain, but let me try and make this a little simpler to understand. Inductive data, when you go and do inductive data collection, you set out without forming an opinion. You set out with an open mind about what you're going to find, and you let the data guide you towards forming an opinion. To give you an example, I pick up my rucksack and I decide to go traveling. Now, I do not have any plan or destination in my mind. I walk out of the house, the first bus I see, I jump into it, I purchase a ticket, I get down at the last stop. There, maybe I find a connecting train, I take the train, and I just allow what I find in terms of transport to lead me from one place to another place. So I don't have a fixed destination. I'm allowing my transport to decide where I will reach by the end of the day. So that is similar to inductive reasoning, where you set out to find data without having any opinion of what you're going to find. Deductive reasoning, on the other hand, is like you already know your destination is Rome. So what are you going to do is you're going to figure out the shortest, the easiest, the cheapest, the most comfortable way of reaching from your house to Rome. So deductive method starts out by already having a conclusion in your head. You already have an opinion in your head, and you're trying to prove that what you have in your head, the conclusion is actually true. So in inductive method, you might reach Rome, you might not reach Rome, but the deductive method, you already know that you are going to reach Rome, and you make every effort to reach Rome. So this is the difference between qualitative data and quantitative data in terms of inductive reasoning and deductive reasoning. Now, inductive reasoning, as I told you, you allow the data to guide you. So you explore the data with keeping an open mind. Whereas in quantitative data, you are looking at forming conclusions. Okay, the research type, it's conclusive. This is exploratory. This one is conclusive. You have to prove something. Quantitative data is always to prove something, to come to a conclusion. Now, since there are two of them, qualitative and quantitative, then it means that they have different uses. So the next question is, when do I use what kind of data? Now, when you want to explore an idea in an ongoing process, you stick to qualitative data. But when you want to examine the cause-effect relationship between variables, you have to collect quantitative data. Okay? Now, look at qualitative data as a tool. It helps you formulate a hypothesis. Remember, we did some background reading. Maybe you speak to a few people, your students, you get an idea, and you're able to formulate a hypothesis on the basis of your qualitative data. For example, you can conduct an interview with your students and you can ask them what they find interesting, and on the basis of that, you can formulate a hypothesis. But when you're talking about quantitative data, you're going to use the quantitative data to test your hypothesis. So one helps you formulate and the other helps you test it, whether it is true or not. The last thing about qualitative data is that it helps you develop a deeper understanding of the topic. So most of the time, qualitative data is used in the beginning half of your research. You collect qualitative data, you understand the concept better, and you remold and you modify your hypothesis. Now, once you've remolded and specified and modified and polished your hypothesis, what you do is you use the quantitative data to prove what you have set out to prove and to recommend a final course of action. For example, this method, if I use it, will it be useful? So with the data, you can prove either it is useful or it is not useful. So this is the basic difference between qualitative and quantitative method. Now, the next question is when and what type of, we spoke about when, now what type of data to choose for your research? If you want to do a good research, a strong research, then you have three options. Option one is you use only qualitative data. Now, when you're taking qualitative data, it deals with people's minds, feelings, attitudes, and opinions. So it is always interesting because it has that psychological aspect to it. But it is extremely weak in itself because it has no mathematical proof. So it is weak data. It is interesting data, but it is weak data. So this is what happens if you stick only to a qualitative study, qualitative data. Option 2 is you decide that, okay, I will not look into qualitative data. I will stick to hard facts. So you go and you choose quantitative data. Now, quantitative data is strong because it's in numbers. It's easier for you to prove it statistically. But because you have to do a lot of number crunching, the human aspect to it is lost, and it might become a little tedious to go through all that numbers. So qualitative data collection and research is interesting. Quantitative data collection is maybe not so interesting, but it is definitely strong. So we have a third option. The third option is, why don't you combine the good parts of qualitative data, and why don't you combine the good parts of quantitative data? Nobody has stopped you from using both of them. So this is known as the mixed method, where you're taking the good parts of this and the good parts of that. So when you're using qualitative data, what happens is that the interesting aspect remains and the weak aspect is taken out, because you're also using quantitative data, which is providing you the mathematical proof. But it does not remain much of hard work and tedious, because the interest factor has come in. So now when you're using a mixed method, you have something which is both interesting to you and is also a strong proposition. So my suggestion is, when you're doing a good research, you should mostly try and use the qualitative plus quantitative data. The qualitative data should come in the beginning part of your research, when you're starting out on your research. Once you have formulated a good hypothesis and you have a deeper understanding of the topic, then you move on to your quantitative data. But here is a word of warning. The ratio of qualitative to quantitative is not 50-50. It is, in fact, 80-20. That means a good research should have 80% quantitative data and 20% qualitative data. That would make it a good ratio. Now, I'm going to use myself as a case study to explain how I did a particular research paper. So when I was in school, I was very fond of using comics, and there have been many a times my teacher has thrown me out of the classroom because she caught me reading comic books on the sly. So by force, they made sure that they confiscated all my comic books, and it got replaced with the English textbooks and readers. So since I was 10 or 12 years old, I was always plagued by this thought that what is so wrong about learning English through comic books? Why can't I use a comic? Because the comic books are interesting, they're visually pleasing, they're talking in English, it's in the dialogue form. So, whatever fluency in English I got, a lot of it is thanks to the fact that I used to read a lot of comic books. So when I grew up, that little thing in my head, it prompted me that now is the time that I want to find an answer to the question. So what did I do? First, I asked myself a question, the question being, why can't I use comic books to learn English language, or for that matter, any language? What is so wrong with it? The next step, what did I do? I did some reading up. Okay, so here comes the interesting part. I went and did some online research, and I found, oh my God, there are a lot of research going on about the efficacy of comic books in the syllabus for language teaching. Most of this research is done in other countries. India, in a way, is pretty rigid about what has to go in a syllabus. So they're not very happy about the idea of including comic books. So I found a gap in the existing research. I found that there is hardly any research about the use of comic books and graphic novels in India. So, wow, I have something that I found interesting. It prodded me to frame a hypothesis. I found the gap. So what did my hypothesis look like? Comics and graphic novels are more effective than plain text stories in improving English among ESL learners. So all this while, children or students in our country, mostly we read textbooks with a lot of text-intensive stuff. So my proposal is, why can't we use comic books? And if we use comic books, it might be more effective in improving English among English as a second language learners, ESL learners. So to make a strong research, what did I do? I took some qualitative data, I took some quantitative data, and I created strong research. Now, qualitative data made sure that my research was interesting. Quantitative data made sure that my data was numerically, statistically strong. And what I created was original work, because so far in India, not a lot of people had done research on this. And it was quality product because I had not taken the data from some secondary data repository. It is data that I collected from students in and around me. So it was living data. It was quality product. Now, what did I use for qualitative data? I first went to different schools. I spoke to students, and I asked them a question that, how do you like the idea of having a few comic books included in the syllabus? Is it interesting for you? Is it appealing to you? And on the basis of the answer, I felt confident that yes, children might just enjoy the entire idea of having comic books included as a part of the syllabus. So what did I do? I took two groups of students, a test group and a control group. To the test group, I taught them a story in the form of a comic books. Specifically, I taught them the story of Chanakya, who is a historical figure from India. And to my control group, I taught them the same story of Chanakya in the text format. It's a plain text format without pictures, without anything. Now, I taught them the same story, and then I gave them a standardized test, the same test to my test group and my control group, and I collected the data. What I had after that was my sample data. I had data from my test group, and I had data from my control group. Now, what I have in my hand is sample data, which means that the data is a very small quantity. I could not possibly go to a lot of schools. I could not even go outside Bombay, forget about going outside Maharashtra or India. I was forced to stick to a few schools. So the data I collected was a small local sample from the entire population. So how do I make the results of my study applicable to a larger population? This is where the statistical analysis part comes in. Now, statistical analysis is simply about figuring out how this data can be made applicable to a larger population. Statistical modeling just gives you the confidence to say that, okay, I'm 90% confident that this, if it worked with 20 students, it will work with the entire population. So one of the teachers asked me a question that I do not know much about maths. I'm from English background. So here is my answer. I love to use French perfume, but I do not need to know how to make French perfume. I can just go and buy it off the counter. Similarly, you as a researcher, you do not need to know how to do mathematical or statistical analysis. You collect the data, you group it up, and you hand it over to the statistician, and it will take him about a day or two to put it in an Excel sheet and to get you the reading. The statistical analysis will just give you the confidence about how well this will be applied to the entire population. So when you add statistical modeling to your sample data, what you get is global research. Now, why do I call it global? Is because it has moved from being a small-time local research to a research that is applicable to any corner of the world. Next thing is that this paper that I made not only got accepted in India, but it got accepted in Japan, it got accepted in Malaysia, not because this was some groundbreaking research, but this was research which was new in India. So they were interested to know what people in India found out about this research. So this is what it means to be able to use statistical modeling onto your sample data. Now, Abhijit sir, can you post link number 2? Please give me a verbal reply and then I'll start my stopwatch.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you. So, my dear audience, I'm sending in a second quiz. I will be using 3 different quizzes just to cement in the concept that I've explained Once you run through the questionnaire, I feel more confident that maybe I've been able to deliver what I plan to, and then I'll move on to part 4. Okay. I'm starting my stopwatch now. Okay, with that, I come to the end of the 2 minutes wait period. You can continue answering. I will move on to part 4. This is where we can talk about data collection tools. And if you really have them down pat, you will not face any problem even in this COVID situation. So there are quite a number of tools you can use, but we're going to focus only specifically on a few of them. Okay. Now, I'm going to talk about quantitative data first, because as I told you, a good empirical research would have 80% quantitative data and 20% qualitative data. So in terms of quantitative data, you have 3 tools that you must have and you must know about it. One is your standardized test. I will talk more about it in detail in the next slide. Then we have questionnaires, okay? And then we have rating scales. Right now, I'm just going to list them, and then I will go over each one of them one by one. Okay, in terms of qualitative data, you have interviews, you have focus groups. Okay, now focus group is just a fancy term for a group discussion, but it's basically one and the same thing. And then you have the option of observations. Now, first I will cover the quantitative data tools, and then I'll move on to the qualitative data tools. Now, in terms of quantitative data tools, the first one we're going to talk about the standard test. Now, what makes a test standard is that all the test takers have the same number of questions. The time allowed for all the test takers is also same. The medium of answering is the same. For example, if the students are answering, either all of them answer on a pen and paper or all of them answer in a computer-based test. It cannot happen that 10 of them are answering on a paper-based and maybe 20 of them on a computer. No, it has to be the same. The medium of answering has to be the same. The fourth one is that the exam environment. Either you write a physical exam where you have the pen and paper, or you do it online. Either which ways, it has to be one. The environment has to be same for all the test takers. Next is the scoring system. So the scoring system, it's very easy to understand. for the quiz that you're doing right now, the scoring system is for the same everybody. If you get it correct, you get 25 marks. If you get it wrong, you don't score in that. So the scoring system, no matter what student takes, should remain the same. And the last one is the evaluation of the rubrics. Now, you already had a session on rubrics, so I'm not going to go into detail. It's just that it tells you that the teacher is not going to use any kind of favoritism by marking somebody A+, even when they got maybe a poor percentage. So the evaluation and the grades that you award will also be the same in a standardized test. Good examples of standardized tests would be the kind of spelling tests or maths tests that you have in school, or for example, when you have to enter the academic word, you take exams like a GMAT or a GRE, or for example, you take tests like an IQ test or an EQ test. All of these are examples of standard tests. Now, testing is also applicable not only for human subjects, but also in lab results. So lab results are also tests. So anything that you record is also a test. So that is one method of collecting quantitative data. Next one we can talk about is questionnaires. Now, this is your safety net. This is what you're primarily going to be using in order to collect your data while sitting at home. So there are two types of questionnaires. One is the open-ended, and the other one is the close-ended questionnaire. Now, what is an open-ended question? An open-ended question is where you give a question like, what is your favorite fruit? And you leave a blank. So the respondent is free to put in their answer. So here, the best part is that you are not exerting any kind of influence on the answer of the respondent, but the drawback is it's difficult to analyze. For example, I can say banana, somebody else can say mango, somebody else will say strawberry, somebody else will say melons. Now, where is the point of commonness where you can group it and you can analyze it? So it's difficult to analyze, and it is more time consuming for respondents, because if you ask me just on the spur of the moment, what is your favorite fruit? I keep thinking that, oh my God, I have so many of them. Which one do I choose? So this is for one question. Imagine if you give a questionnaire, which is 10 open-ended question. By the time I reach to the fifth question, I'm like, I don't want to do it, because it's taking too much of thinking, too much of effort on my part. So the next option is when you're framing a questionnaire, you fall back upon close-ended question. Now, close-ended question is that it gives you fixed number of options, and you have to choose within that. You don't have the liberty of going beyond those options. So which of the following fruit is your favorite? See, I've given you 5 options, and you are forced to choose. Okay, now, the best part about the close-ended question is that the answer is definitive. I can easily see the number of hits I got for banana. So maybe after circulating this to 100 people, I can figure out on the frequency check how many people have ticked banana. Maybe banana is the favorite fruit of people in Bombay. So this is easier to analyze, but you see it also. And another good part is that it is less time consuming for the correspondent. They just read the options and your brain pretty much works fast enough to tick the one that you want. But the only drawback of a close-ended question is that it restricts the answer choice for the respondent. I have given only 5 fruits. There might be any number of fruits that people really like, which I could not put it in the questionnaire. So this is a drawback of close-ended question. But if you see in comparison to an open-ended question, it has more drawbacks than a close-ended question. So open-ended questions have their own place, but that place is not in a questionnaire. Open-ended questions are a poor choice for a questionnaire. So where do we use open-ended questions? We use open-ended questions in interviews, which is a tool for collecting qualitative data. So when you're looking at quantitative data and you're looking at questionnaires, forget about open-ended questions and you stick only to close-ended questions, because it will be easier for you to analyze, and because it will be easier for you to analyze it statistically. So now I am going to move on to close-ended questions, and you will see that there are different types of questions you can use in a close-ended questionnaire. The first one is a dichotomous question. These are bipolars. There can only be two options, yes or no. So, if you ask me, are you a human being? I can only say yes, or I can say no. There is no other option than the yes or no, or the true or false. So this is the first variety. The second variety is the multiple choice questions, like A, B, and C, and you choose one of them, apple, banana, orange, and you choose one of them. The third one is ranking. Okay, now here is what happens if you give more than one answer option to multiple choice. What happens if I tick on A and C? If I tick and say I like apples and I like oranges also. So as a researcher, you do not know which one I like more. Do I like apples more than oranges? I like both of them, but I might like one of them more than the other. So then what you do is you pair up a multiple choice question with a ranking where you say that I like apples the most, and then I like oranges, and the least one that I like in this entire selection are pears. Okay, the last one is the rating scale. Okay, now you know that apple is my favorite from my ranking answer, but do you know to what extent I like it on a scale of 0 to 5? So I can tell you that I'm fondest of apple, but on a scale of 0 to 5, I like apples at 4. So rating tells you to what extent you like something, you agree with something, or you disagree with something. So these are the 4 types of close-ended questions that you're going to use in your questionnaire. Now, how to frame a questionnaire is a tough job. If your questionnaire is poorly framed, the data you will collect will be poor. In fact, it will be so poor that statistically there'll be nothing left to analyze. So framing a questionnaire in itself is a big task of how well your research will go. I wish I had more time to go deeper into framing questionnaires. Unfortunately, I will not be able to go further than this. It's just a cursory glance over the different kind of questions. Okay, so moving on to the last tool in quantitative data is your rating scale. Now, the rating scale is my favorite. Now, it has this person, Likert. Okay, he's the one who made the scale, and we all owe him a thanks because he made it possible to convert qualitative data, to convert people's opinions to a numerical data. So that is such a wonderful thing that he did for us. So Likert scale is of 2 kinds, in words and in points or numbers. So a Likert scale in terms of words, it looks like this, or you might have seen, you agree, you strongly agree, or you mildly agree, you disagree. So these are word-based Likert scale where you give your opinion and you use words to express your opinion. On the other hand, here you had the point-based Likert scale. So, instead of words, I'm using numbers to tell you to what extent, to what degree I like, I dislike something. Now, if you compare the Likert scale, which is in words and in points, I would suggest that you always frame a rating scale in terms of points, because statistically, it's much easier to find out the results from a number-based Likert scale as compared to a word-based Likert scale. It is very much possible to do statistical analysis of the word-based one too, but that's a lot more complicated process than finding a mean value in the point-based Likert scale. Now we are moving on to the qualitative tools of data collection. And the first one is the one that can be done the easiest and the simplest way is your interview. Now, when you're conducting an interview, you have options to go for a structured interview, or you could go for an unstructured interview. Now, if you're looking at a structured interview, the best part of the interview is that it is direct interaction. It's right from the horse's mouth. You get the answers. It's more planned and systematic because you already have a set of questions you have prepared beforehand, and you know how to guide the entire interview because your questions are already fixed. It has a format. It is easier for the respondent because they know that, okay, this has got some sort of a structure, and the person who's taken the interview is not just picking up random questions and asking. So it's easier and more systematic for the person who is giving the answers too. And Because if you're asking the same questions to 50 people, you can group their answers because the questions are same, so they will be patterns to their answers. So it'll be easier to find the pattern and easier to put them or separate them into teams. Now, unstructured interviews are also interviews. So the good part is that, again, they have direct interaction as same like the structured one. The beauty of an unstructured interview is that it's free flow. You can go in any direction. You just allow your intuition to guide you. It's more fun because nothing restricts you and you can just go along with the flow. But there is one drawback, is that if the questions for every different respondent is a different question, how do you find a pattern? How do you find a point of commonness? How do you analyze it into themes? So my suggestion is that if you are planning to use qualitative data, please go ahead with a structured interview. An example of a structured interview is anybody who has gone for this IELTS speaking test, you will see that they have fixed type of questions for fixed duration and fixed format in which you need to answer it. So this is an example of a structured interview. Please stick to structured interview as compared to unstructured interviews. The next one is we're talking about focus groups. As I said, it's nothing but group discussions. Now, the positives of a focus group is that, again, like an interview, you get it directly from the subjects. You discuss 360 degrees. That means you can talk about, the pros and cons, the good things, the bad things. You can talk about everything from in that 360-degree angle. It's less time consuming than interviews. In an interview, it's one-to-one. So it might take you half an hour to interview one respondent, but in half an hour, you can talk to maybe 5 or 6 people. So economically, it is more advantageous to use focus groups to collect your data. Now, quick data collection. I'm going to tell you how this works. Say if you send out a questionnaire, you have sent it out from your side, but how fast people will answer and get it back to you, again, is not in your hand. So people might take 5 days to respond back to you, but in a focus group or an interview, you get your data then and there. Another example is that if for example, you're doing some school project research and you want to see how long, this plant will take to grow. So you might have to wait for a month to get your results. So in an interview and in a focus group, the best part is that the data collection is really, really quick. Now, there are also negatives about focus groups. One is that it's rather unstructured. Okay, just like that unstructured interview, but at least there is one respondent out there. Here you have multiple respondents. So a lot of conflict, argument might arise. If there are people arguing all around you, then you will find it difficult to maybe manage the group. And the other problem is that out of 6 people, maybe one of them is a shy person, not a very vocal person. He or she will get overshadowed by the person who talks a lot. So this is all about focus groups. And I'll move on to the last one in the qualitative data is our observation. Now, when you observe something, you can observe something in 3 different types of settings. The first setting is a naturalistic setting. See, I go to the classroom and I don't enter the classroom. I stand outside and I just see what the students are doing in the break period. So I observe and I take down my observation. That is known as naturalistic. A good part about naturalistic is that they are not aware of somebody watching them. So they are in their most natural behavior and you do not manipulate any of the data that you collect. The next one is a participative, where you are there interacting with your subjects. And so in a way, you are kind of guiding the process. So there's a participative one. It can be in a naturalistic setting. And the last one is in a laboratory setting, where you decide, the conditions and everything. So in a laboratory, you can either be participative or you can be an observer. So these are the different kinds of observations that you can use. Now, the characteristics of observations, this is the best form of collecting qualitative data because people are not on their guard. So they are showing you the true colors, and this is the most authentic data that you can get. It's in the most natural setting. Now, The best part is that you are not guiding their behavior. So there is no manipulation involved. So it is authentic data, 100% true to the respondents. And it is easier for you to study people's behavior, and you are able to establish a relationship between the cause and the effect. And this is exactly what I was telling you, that before you start out collecting quantitative data, you must look at some amount of qualitative data that will give you a deeper understanding of the topic, and it will help you establish a relationship between the cause and the effect. Only drawback, you can say there are two drawbacks, in fact, that it's very, very time consuming. You sitting for hours, watching people, making notes is very, very time intensive. And the next one is that you have to wait for the right moment to observe their behavior. For example, you're studying what makes school children lose their cool, what makes them agitated. Now you have to wait for the right moment when a child is agitated to study what factor caused the agitation. So you have to be hanging around your sample to be able to observe their behavior. So you always have to wait for the right moment. So these are some of the positives and negatives of observation as a qualitative data collection tool. So Abhijit sir, I would like you to post the third link.
Okay, ma'am.
Yes, thank you. Okay, I think that is 2 minutes time. So I will now take you through the area of tools that I chose for my data collection, for my research on that comic book affair. So for qualitative data, I used structured interviews. I went to different schools, talked to the students, asked them questions, took down the notes, and then I used standardized tests on the control group and the test group. To fortify my data even more, what I did was I also used a Likert scale rating questionnaire. So you see, I had some amount of qualitative data, but I had a lot of quantitative data in terms of sheer numbers. So, I was trying to fortify my research with more amount of heavy duty quantitative data. So once I had my structured interview, standardized tests, and Likert scale, what I got was my sample data. I converted my sample data with the use of statistical modeling into a global research. This I've already talked about. I just wanted to show you the tools that I used for my research paper. Now we're moving on to the last part. We are going to talk about, the blueprint of a research paper. And I hope that by this time, the skepticism that you are feeling is going to turn to some amount of confidence that you feel about embarking on your next empirical research. Now, when you're talking about a research paper, I put up a picture of an hourglass here. You see the hourglass shape. It's broad on top, it narrows down in the center, and it broadens out again. So a good research paper starts out with a general background, a general introduction, a general reason that motivated you to frame your research questionnaire. Then you move into specific details, and these details are specific to your study. Now, once you get the specific details, once you find something specific and useful, what you do is you try and generalize it so that it is applicable to the entire population. So it moves from general to specific to general. Now, when I'm talking about general, I'm talking about establishing a background, the introduction. Now, once you have your research question, you decide on a methodology. Now, the methodology is a lot narrower than the top. This is because every researcher would have a different methodology. So what methodology you choose is very specific to you. So it is it's fine-tuned towards your research paper. What is most specific to your research, the heart of your research paper, is your result. If there are no results, there's nothing worthwhile in your paper. So the result is exclusively yours. Let me use that word. Nobody else's paper would have the same result because it is your data, and the result that you found is explicitly yours. So it is at the narrowest. Now, once I have my result, I told you, a good research is all about making it available for the people. So you use statistical modeling, and then you put it out to the world that, see, I have done this testing. It works for my 20, 30, 50 sample. So it should also work for you. So it moves from a general to specific to general. This is known as the hourglass model. And this is how most good research papers are framed. Now, I'm going to talk about just the sections that are involved in a research paper. I don't have time to go deeper into this topic. Now, the abstract, any paper, whether it is empirical or non-empirical, would start out with the abstract. But the abstract in an empirical paper is very, very specific, cut and dry. There is no two ways about it. It's a formula that you have to follow. What is the formula? You write 2 sentences at the most per section. So you write 2 sentences about your introduction, 2 about your methodology, 2 about your results, and 2 about your conclusion. And the total length of your abstract should not exceed 120 words if it is going to be. In an empirical research paper, the shorter your paper it is, the more, the more useful you can say it is, because people do not have a lot of time to read through 50-page papers. Okay, so in an introduction, what you do is you establish the background. I established the background for my research by saying that in school, my teachers always threw me out of class. They never allowed me to read comic books. However, I feel that I have learned pretty good English through comic books. So that is my background. What literature review did I do? I read up about the research that is happening around the world. Now, once I read about the research, their results convinced me that yes, there is some logic to you proposing that comic books are pretty useful in the classroom. So I get my justification, I frame my research question, and I move on to my hypothesis. Next is your methodology. Here, you're going to talk about your experiment design. Experiment design is how do you want to go ahead with it? Whom do you want to target? Who is going to be a sample? How are you going to collect your data? How are you going to, analyze it? This entire thing is your experiment design. Subject, who is your subject? The people that you're interested in doing this on. For me, I took school students from schools around Bombay. So they were my subjects. And subjects you have to divide again into the test group and the control group. Material, what material did I use? I used a Chanakya story from a publisher of comic books called Tinkle, and I used a plain text story of Chanakya that I had taken from the internet. So this is the material that I used. I used a standard question at the end for them to test it, and I used a Likert scale question. So these are basically the material I used for my research. Procedure I've already talked about, how I use those data collection, how did I get it? And the last part is that how am I going to do the data analysis? What tool, what software am I going to use? Okay. Now, you will be very glad to know that Google Forms are really good because it already forms the graphs from the data that you've collected. If it is in the point form, if it is in the Likert scale or multiple choice question, you can easily, all close-ended questions can be graded and Google gives you the graphs immediately. Before Google came, we used to work with Excel sheets, but maybe now Excel sheets are not required all that much. You can do your data analysis on the basis of Google Forms. Then once you have the data, you calculate using your statistical models. This is where you pass on your graphs and your charts to a person who is an expert in statistical analysis. You don't have to do anything. You just have to explain your experiment design. You have to give him the null hypothesis. You have to give him your hypothesis, and you have to tell him what conclusion you are planning to reach. So he will analyze the data, he'll apply the model, and then what happens is your results are tested for reliability. Okay, like how reliable is it? To what extent are you confident that this will work? How valid it is? If it is reliable and valid for a small sample group, will it be the same? Will it have the same reliability and validity for a larger population? Now, once you have got your statistical testing done, you need to just prove or disprove your hypothesis. So what you framed in the introduction, in the hypothesis section, the conclusion is just a statement to show that, yes, I've been able to prove my hypothesis, or no, unfortunately, my hypothesis could not be proved. So the opposite of my hypothesis must be true. And then you show the global application of your research. Most of the time, good empirical research will give you positive results. That means you'll be able to prove your hypothesis and you'll be able to establish and show its applicability to a larger group. Okay, so this is what I have for you today. I'm sorry I had to rush a lot because I don't think, beyond a certain period of time, the brain can focus on more information. Before I sign out for today, I really want to thank the people who made it possible for me to reach out to so many people in my audience. And I feel that you must know about them because there's so many people working behind the scene, and we never get to know who are those people who helped me come up till here, because I'm a nobody. I don't have a lot of recognition in terms of academic achievements and all. So I approached this person and I said, I would like to do a section on empirical research. And this person, he gave me his word and he said, yes, ma'am, we'll make it possible. So I'm going to present to you a man whose words are worth their weight in gold. I have here Dr. Ramkrishnan Bise. He is the Joint Secretary of ELTAI at the All India level. I call him a visionary because he is silent worker doing all the work in the background, but he's the one who steers everything. And he's also an academician. He teaches in college. So I have a funny story about Ram, sir. I asked him, sir, I would like a few snaps of yours. So, he decided to send me 53 of them. So I said, okay, from 53, at least, I have the freedom of choosing at least 3 of them. So here is Dr. Bise in his very business-like mode, taking a lecture, I think giving a speech. And then we have Dr. Bise in a very, very down-to-earth, earthy mode. I think he's doing some sort of community service here. And here we have Dr. Bise in his coolest mode, most chilled out and relaxed mode. My heartfelt thanks to this person. Without him, I wouldn't be doing this webinar today. So yes, he is the man you need to approach. If you have anything worthwhile delivering, if you want to reach out to people, this is the person you need to get in touch with. Next, I'm going to talk about my 3 super charming graces. Now, you might be aware that the three daughters of Zeus are the three graces. So I have three ladies today with me who has guided me, literally guided me, throughout the entire process. And the first one of them, I'm going to talk about them in the sequence that they appeared. So first, I'm going to talk about Aglaya, which represents brightness, and I have Professor Tamsha Charya. I call her a lady of grace because you look at her face and you just know she's so graceful, so elegant, there's a glow about her. When I asked her, ma'am, is there something that you'd like me to share about you? And she said, I'm an avid traveler and she's also teaching in a university. This is Tamsha, ma'am. I'm sure you remember her from the person who hosted this webinar in the first place. Now, she also sent me 2 pictures. So, I'm more than happy to put 2 of her pictures, and you will see that most of them are, in some very nice exotic travel destination. Okay, I'm moving on to my second grace. My second grace is Euphrosyne, which is joyfulness. If you look at this lady, you just know that her heart is full of joy. I call her a heart person, and I have a story to share about her. She was never a member of ELTAI, but I personally requested her, ma'am, you must do my introduction, because her introduction, I know it comes from the heart, not from a piece of paper. So you won't believe me that the next day she took a membership of ELTAI just so that she could introduce me today. And she's also a gifted writer. If those of you are interested, please visit the Oxford blog that they have created, and you will find ma'am's article on it. It's beautiful. You must visit. And she's also teaching in college. So here I have Professor Shinoy. She's my second grace. And my third grace, you have yet to meet her. She's Thalaya, which means bloom. And you just have to look at her face, and she is the sunflower in my life, the very charming, very transparent, bright, smiley person. She also happens to be a poetess, and she is the co-founder of a Poet Society. She's teaching in college. She's a trainer also, soft skill trainer. And the thing is, I have seen people giving the vote of thanks, but there's nobody who gives a vote of thanks to the person who gives a vote of thanks. So thank you, ma'am, in advance for what you will be doing. Next, I am going to Leonidas and his 300 Spartans. We know the Battle of Thermopylae, right? And how these 300 Spartans held off a huge, huge army. So I'm going to present to you Dr. Sachin Bumbe. He's the president of ELTAI Mumbai. Now, I call him a true mentor. He's the quiet kind, guiding you, never enforcing anything on you, but just allowing you to do what is in the best way you can say. So here is Dr. Bumbe, very humble person, always behind the scenes. So I thought, I should show their pictures on the slide. I'm moving on to his 300 Spartans here. First, I'm going to talk about Professor Anwar Sheikh. If Dr. Bumbe is the engine of the car moved by ELTAI Mumbai, then Professor Anwar, he's the steering wheel which takes it in the direction that we want to go. So, without him, Dr. Bumbe alone would find it very difficult. Next, we have Professor Debraj. Now, this is the baby of the team. He's the one who's been helping me silently, with a lot of information. And mostly, I think, for all the links and all that has been created, we can thank him for that. And last, we have these 2 people. They are the technical people who have made it possible for me to sit in the comfort of my home to reach out to you to different corners of the world. This is Professor Abhijit Kamte, and this is Professor Mrunal Sangetra. These 2 people I really need to thank. There are a lot of other people also who have worked towards making this webinar a success. I'm calling it a success. I don't know, might be presumptuous, but I will leave that to ma'am, Suman Sharma, and she will take us through the vote of thanks. But before we move to the vote of thanks, I have a gift for you. Abhijit sir, can you post the last link? This is a worksheet that I have prepared for people who are interested in starting their first empirical research paper. This worksheet will help you, put down your thoughts into a concrete form. Okay, please tell me if you like what I've created. You can download it from my Google Drive. Any of you who would like to ask me any questions, you can always message me on WhatsApp. This is my number. You can also email me with your queries. If you have requests for further sessions, I'll be more than happy to appear again. And this is me saying thank you and bye for listening to me, from beginning to end. Now, I think we have a question and answer session. So I would request Thamsa ma'am, if there are any questions you could ask, and I'll try to answer to the best of my ability.
So, hi Chumke again.
Hi, ma'am.
And that was such a wonderful session. I think I can just keep saying, wow.
Thank
you. You sort of covered it up very, very brilliantly. And forget about 3 questions. We have loads of them. But again, my eye is also on the clock. So let's see how many we can take it. And as you promised, it was super fun and demystifying what has seemed and must have seemed so difficult to so many of our new researchers. The clarity with which you did it was, I must say, very, very praiseworthy. I also, Chumki, madam, I also like the idea that the stress should be there on primary data, which presupposes originality, which is so important today. And let me just again tell you that the chat box is flooded with both compliments and questions. So, okay with you? Shall I go ahead?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So here we have a question from a participant who wants to know, how does she improve her research thinking?
Yeah, I said right in the beginning that research thinking has to first come from your, undying thirst to know something. If you know something, then you would want to find out and know the answer. Don't do a research just because you want to publish the paper or the degree. Do a research because you really want to do it. And that is the spirit of good research. If the starting point is good, the ending will also be good. So look at something that you really want to find an answer to. I think that's the best I can answer you.
Yeah, and the reading which she can add up. The second one is, could you just very quickly give a couple of examples how to do empirical research in online teaching? Considering that so many of all of us are into online teaching now. So just maybe a couple of topics is this participant wants to know that.
Yeah, so next Saturday, I'm going to do a session on how you can use songs in your classroom to, improve proficiency in English. So songs are easy for you to access on YouTube. You can play it to your students, and you can give them a test on their comprehension, and on the basis of the test, you can compare your data, and you can find out if using songs is an effective tool in the online method of teaching, because it's very difficult to reach out. So will songs help keep their interest alive? So this is one example that I could come up at the top of my head. I might have to sit for a while to think for more topics.
Yes, I can understand. In 2 hours, you have been telling us things. But this also sounds super exciting. So I, for one, am going to be there. Just one more. Is it possible to undertake qualitative or mixed method research exclusively through digital platforms?
Yes. See, an interview you can conduct over the phone. So all you need to do is you need to first send out a mail to people requesting a time, and you can talk to them maybe for half an hour. So your qualitative data is ready through an interview, or you can have a qualitative data collection on Zoom in forms of a focus group, a discussion group. And your quantitative data can be in the form of a standardized test. You teach them something, you give them the questionnaire online, they answer and they return it to you. on your, whichever Teams, whatever platform you're using. And you can also spam your questionnaires and get your data. So you are, kind of fortified from all sides, qualitative data as well as quantitative data, sitting in the comfort of your home.
Okay, that I'm sure is very encouraging for us in the present situation we are there. And this is a question from Philippines. It's from Rosa Mary. And she wants to know, how would you measure the 80% quantitative and 20% qualitative data ratio?
Oh, I see. This is just, again, it's a qualitative thing I'm saying. There is no number really that can demarcate the 80-20. But all I'm trying to say is that only in the beginning half of your research, you stick to qualitative data. Once you've spoken to your subjects, you've got an idea in which direction you go, then you do not focus anymore on qualitative data collection, because that is not going to take you much further in proving your hypothesis. So once you've spent, okay, let me tell you this way, 80-20. So let me say 20% of the research time that you've decided you want to invest in data collection, only 20% of it, focus it on qualitative data. Remaining 80% of the time, if you take it in terms of time, maybe 80% of the time you spend in collecting your quantitative data. So that will make sure that the quantitative data you've collected is a lot more in comparison to your qualitative data. So 80-20 is just an approximation. It doesn't have to be 80-20, it can be 70-30. But all I'm saying is that your quantitative data has to be a lot more, at least double the amount of your qualitative data. Let's put it that way. Have I answered?
Okay. I don't know. Rosa Mary will have to tell us whether you've answered. I hope that satisfies you. And can I just take a very quick one? What would be a good number to test for both control and experimental group? Especially as one is sitting at home now. So what would be an approximate testing number? How many would you say?
Oh, I would suggest you spam it to as many people as you can. If 2,000 people reply, then make your sample group 2,000. If 20 people reply, make your sample group 20, because the sample size of your sample group will not really matter, because you're going to use statistical modeling to make it applicable to a larger population. So don't worry about the sample group. For my research for this comics book, I used only 20 in the control and 20 in the test group. So if you get more numbers, it's more valid, right? But if you get lesser number also, not to worry, the statistical tools will make it equally valid. That's all I have to say. So don't worry about numbers. You just spam your questionnaire and see how many people get back to you. But it should be equal number. It should be equal. If you have 100 in the test group, then you should also have 100 in the control group. The number should be matched.
Okay. Much as we all would wish to continue, and I have actually some 7 questions more, but I'm afraid we are running out of time. So thank you so much again, Dr. Biswas. Though we have a formal vote of thanks, may I request Madam Suman Sharma to deliver the same?
Thank you, ma'am.
Over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tamsa ma'am. So on behalf of ELTAI Mumbai chapter, I'm here to propose the vote of thanks. Let me extend my heartfelt thanks to all of you for making this webinar a huge success. With more than 800 participants from 38 countries, that's indeed an achievement, I should say. Sincere gratitude to our resource person, Dr. Chumki Biswas, for her absolutely engaging and tremendously informative presentation on empirical research. Indeed, ma'am, you did not allow a single dull moment, and must have inspired so many to take up empirical research. I thank the moderator of the session, Dr. Tamsa Acharya ma'am, for steering the discussion ahead proficiently and handling the question-answer session with prowess. A special word of thanks to Mrs. Anupma Shenoy for introducing the speaker in such fine words. It was the technical team comprising of Mr. Abhijit Kamte and Mrs. Mrunal ma'am that deserve special thanks for making things smooth in this virtual session. Let me also thank the core committee members of ELTAI Mumbai, Dr. Ram Bise, National Joint Secretary, Dr. Sachin Mumbai, President of Mumbai Chapter, Mr. Anwar Sheikh, and Dr. Sushila Vijay Kumar, Vice President of ELTAI Mumbai Chapter, Dr. Sachin Labure, Dr. Meghna Chatterjee, Dr. Manjiri Vaidya, Ms. Rupa Shetty, Mr. Hanuman Patne, Mr. Devraj Maulik, Ms. Kranti Daibole, Ms. Dr. Swati Vise, Mr. Shivaji Methe, Mr. Pradeep Gulbile, and Mr. Samadhan Lange. Thanks to this committee for giving me as well this opportunity to propose the vote of thanks and for the relentless efforts in organizing this webinar, leaving nothing to chance from the planning to the execution stage, looking into every minute detail with